Hello, everyone, and welcome to another of Cohere's Are We All Listening podcasts. I am very happy today to be joined by an old friend, Pecos Kulihoshi. We're both in Bujumbura in Burundi, where we didn't expect to be. I was trying to get into Congo in Riviera, and I didn't manage to get my visa and get in. And Pecos, meanwhile, was struck by malaria, so we both decided to go back to Bujumbura to the hotel. He's now recovered, and we thought it'd be a good opportunity to do this podcast while we're here. I present Pecos. So, Pecos, how are you feeling now? Are you feeling a bit better?
Yeah, feeling not much better. Yeah. The malaria is really reducing now currently.
Yeah. And we're going to get on to talk about your work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where you're working with refugees, doing very unique work by the sound of things, in that there are very few local organizations specifically working on the issue of refugees in Congo. So that's refugees as being separate from internally displaced people. And so we'll get on to that because your work in that area is fascinating. Your plans are very comprehensive. But maybe we could start by talking and hearing about your background and how you ended up here. And we could go back a bit to when we first met, which was in around 2011. But tell us first a bit, how did you end up in Kampala in the year 2000 and then spend over 20 years living in Uganda as a refugee?
Yeah, thanks so much. As it is, in 1998, I joined the civil society in DRC in Bukavu, that is in South Kivu. And in the year 2000, around September, the rebel group of RCD Goma that controlled the Bukavu arrested the actors of the civil society, and they were deported to Kisangani, and the others were deported to Beni, including the Archbishop of Bukavu. So at Bukavu, we decided to hold a demonstration, and after this demonstration, I was arrested and kept in prison for the 5 days, and later on I managed to escape and managed to reach in Uganda. I reached Uganda in Kampala, where I was registered as an urban refugee. But because the refugees in Uganda were facing a lot of challenges, I decided that I should engage in advocacy. Not actually in advocacy in Uganda, was more in activism in order to ensure that refugee rights are promoted, because by then we couldn't even speak about the refugee rights. So I had to do some few activities around there to ensure that the refugee rights are promoted. And in this process, I was not the best welcome to Uganda. And in the process, for the 20 years I spent in Uganda, I was arrested 24 times. The very last time which pushed me to run away from Uganda was in June 20, when we were under the COVID lockdown. So there are two events that happened which sparked my arrest. One, there were killing of the refugees in Nike Valley by the Ugandan Army, UPDF. And then there are also Uganda government refused the entry of Congolese who are running away from Ituri province on Lake Albert. I was forced to make a press conference, but also I produced a report to Geneva, which did not please the Uganda government. In the process, they opted to arrest me. And in that process, some interventions were done, especially by UN Human Rights Commission and the European Union mission in Kampala. I was released, but still Uganda government continued to look for me. That's how I managed to sneak out and came back to DRC.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe we could touch on some of the activism areas that you worked on, that you were instrumental in Uganda for changing policy. Two of the things that come to mind was that during COVID-19, refugees were systematically excluded from food distribution, which was something that you lobbied on, and eventually there was a change in policy around that. And then another thing maybe previously was related to certain nationalities being able to access refugee status in Uganda when previously they were denied access to refugee status. Maybe you could, I mean, what were your approaches to these policy changes, and why do you think they were successful?
I think in Uganda, yeah, there are quite a number of, beyond that, there are quite a number of policies where I was involved with. Remember, I was the first one to register the refugee-led organization in Uganda. I was in the year 2007. But also I contributed so much in the change of the policy of the refugee policy in Uganda with the current Uganda Refugee Act 2006. By then they had the alien of control. That was the refugee, and it was really oppressive. So we fought a lot in order to ensure that I made a lot of noise. But also there are issues connected to the urban refugee and refugee in the camps. So we had also to engage the Ugandan authorities to give the refugees the freedom to reside wherever they should reside. But also in terms of policies, there was the issues of the accessing the education. At first, the refugees were considered as foreign and they should pay as foreign. So had to come in and did a lot of lobbying so that they can be accepted as considered as Ugandan citizens. So there are quite a number of policies that we really were involved in terms of changing. And in Uganda, used mostly the issues of advocacy. That was a bit aggressive, which we call activism, making a lot of noise, making really a lot of pressure to the authorities so that they can change certain things. And this exactly, I knew the problems of activism is that when you're involved in this, yeah, it provokes quite a number of arrests. So that's how, yeah, in during my time in Uganda, I was facing those kind of arrests. But I believe this was the best way to push for some things to happen. Yeah.
So when you say this activism was quite aggressive, what would that be? Marches with banners, and where did you used to do that?
Yeah, in Uganda, I tried to do some demonstrations. Again, in activism, being on the roadside, on the streets demonstrating is not what is much required. But the way when you announce, you write to the police, because I wrote several times the police that want to demonstrate. When you engage the press that in this particular day I want to hold a demonstration. So for an activism, that's enough. That shows that the demonstration is supposed to be held there. And these activities, when you write to different partners that because of ABCD I want to hold a demonstration, that's enough in terms of activism too, because in most cases the Uganda government did not allow the demonstration to take place, much as we wrote different letters. But again, in this press, the way we announced it also in itself made noise. Secondly, in activism, we wrote a lot of we did a lot of petitions to different authorities, and that alone was not the best, which the Uganda government could appreciate. But also we empowered the refugees themselves in order to be able to vindicate for their rights. And again, this one among the areas where the Uganda government did not feel comfortable to see things are happening. And lastly, what we did in activism was to ensure that refugees have platforms where they can express themselves from. Thus, again, we created different social media networks which did not please the Uganda government, and in which you could find that there are different people from the world joining these, especially the WhatsApp groups, and which became a target for the Uganda government because it realized that the information is leaking from the different WhatsApp groups and could move easily in one day, could move in different refugee camps, could move in different countries on what is happening in Uganda. And that was not the best for Uganda government to tolerate. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So many of your peers, people you used to collaborate with, some of whom we've already interviewed in this series, were focused on direct implementation in the work that they were doing with refugee communities. You also had a refugee-led organization, but it seems that all along you've been more focused on defense of human rights and policy change and advocacy and activism. Why do you think you're more predisposed towards that type of activity as opposed to direct implementation?
Yeah, you cannot implement any kind of a program unless there is a policy change. And I was much aware about that one, that for my colleagues to continue doing what they intend to do, they must have a conducive environment which favors them to do what they want to do on the refugees. And I discussed with them several times, and they realized that they are not so much interested to work on the policy issues which they viewed as confrontational, but yet which was the only option remaining for them to do what they can do. So that's why I choose to say, okay, decided to get involved in the kind of the policies change so that I can create an environment where they can feel comfortable to implement their programs. And I'm so happy that yes, I created this kind of a field which is a bit favorable for them to work from. Yeah.
So you've been arrested in Congo before fleeing to Uganda. You're then arrested in Uganda 24 times. I think I remember once when I was in Kampala, you were arrested because you went down to the police station to lobby for the release of someone who'd been arrested unfairly, and the police said, okay, fine, we'll release him, but we'll put you in prison instead.
Yeah.
And was that the kind of thing that would happen often to you?
Yeah, exactly. There are some kind of the cases of the sort, because you remember by that case, what happened by that time, you remember that when I was in DRC, I was arrested. That's why I left towards Uganda. And when I reached Uganda, I was arrested 24 times. And the particular case you are mentioning, it was on a scenario where the police in Uganda has already considered the Congolese as a business deal. The police had already the mentality that once you manage to arrest a Congolese refugee, you'll get money. And the Congolese have resorted to this, to giving money because of the fear of the police. So I decided to start intervening when a Congolese refugee is arrested, but then the police realized that I'm becoming a threat to them in order to get their money. And so they could not continue. That's how they took me inside, yeah. And there are so many different other cases in which I was arrested because of that, coming in to speak on behalf of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then eventually it was one time too much, and you started to really fear for your safety. I think the last time you were arrested in Uganda, you told me that 7 vehicles turned up to pick you up. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience?
Yeah, exactly. This was on, and the what I was saying in June 2020 during the COVID. Yeah, this happened from 2 incidents. As I was saying, the UPDF, the Ugandan army, killed 3 refugees in Naki Valley settlement in Uganda, and their crimes was that they violated the COVID rules, but they intimidated others who wanted to speak up for this particular case, and the Uganda government did not want someone to say anything about this. At the same moment, there was fighting in this side of Congo in the Ituri territory on Lake Victoria. The Uganda government blocked the Congolese who wanted to cross into Uganda for the safety, because and the Uganda government claimed because of the COVID rules, it cannot allow refugees to enter. So I did 2 things in this one. I wrote an urgent letter to Geneva, which I copied to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva, and I also copied it to the UNHCR. The Human Rights Commission immediately called upon the Ugandan ambassador in Geneva for a meeting and to find out why is this happening in the country. But also they addressed a letter to the Ugandan authorities, to the president. So the president had to follow up this particular case, and they realized that the message came from me. But also I hold a press conference, which which is not pleased the Uganda government. So they decided to arrest me. They started hunting for me. I tried to hide, but at a certain point, I was somewhere. Then they called my friend. So my friend mobilized me to come and have a meeting. Yet they had connived with him. I didn't know that they had connived with him as a way to get me. So in that process, my friend called me for a meeting. We met somewhere, and as I was in the place, I saw him coming. But shortly after greeting each other, less than 3 minutes, the intelligence services also came, the police came, the military came, and other militia who are unarmed people came. They are saying exactly the total number of police of 7 cars full of military, police, and the intelligence services. They came and surrounded me and arrested me, and they took me to the prison. They first took me to the intelligence services, where I stayed for for 1 day. Then after that one, they dropped me to the Jinja police station. And because the intention was for them to deport me back to Congo, the intention was to take me to deport me towards to the border. Then they kill me from there near the border, and then they'll say, okay, he was killed in Congo by the rebels. That's so far what we discovered. But in the process, as they arrested me in the place where was public place, there are so many other Congolese who are there. Some among my friends managed to pick a video, and but they arrested him also, who arrested again too, because they saw him taking a video. So they took him, but he managed to send this video to the WhatsApp group. And then people started sharing it, how they are brutalizing us. So that's how I managed to survive through the pressure from the European Union. European Union and the UN Human Rights Commission, they did a lot of pressure to the government of Uganda. And yeah, I still remember the ambassador of the European Union told me that he himself, at that time, he moved up to the State House and met the president to discuss about my arrest, and they agreed that I should be released. Yeah.
Okay, so you, as quickly as possible, left Uganda and arrived in Goma a few days later, and true to form and true to character, immediately tried to start understanding the refugee situation in the country you'd left 20 years earlier. And what did you find in terms of the reality for refugees in Congo?
When I reached Goma, I realized that the refugees are not promoted in terms of their rights. And efforts that are being done in place were not focused on their protection, but rather to discourage anybody who wants to work on the refugee protection issues. And the main activity which existed was only to compel them to go back to their countries of origin. Mainly, the Rwandan refugees paid a high price and face all the kind of deportation and other kind of forced repatriation towards their country of origin. So I was a bit shocked that this is happening into my country. And that's how I decided to start activities that can help people to understand how we should protect more the refugees in DRC.
People are aware of the refugee population in the north of the country coming from South Sudan and Central African Republic. But I think most people don't have an idea of the real numbers of refugees in Congo. In fact, most people just think of Congo as being the source of refugee displacement and of Congolese refugees outside of Congo without thinking of the number of refugees inside Congo. What are the types of figures that you're working with in terms of the numbers of refugees in Congo?
So far from what we have done, from what we have realized to observe, is that we believe that Congo should be having around 4 million refugees. And this is, and among the 4 million, only 526,000 are documented by UNHCR. All the others are living on their own. Even UNHCR doesn't know where they live, how they live. So they are sitting in the communities on their own, really. And this is one among the area which we are so much concerned about in terms of protection. We can only ensure the protection of the refugees when we know them, when we identify them individually, when we identify their needs, and when we are able to respond to these needs. And that's why we are so much concerned and trying to work hard to ensure that we mobilize the government and also the UNHCR system, that they may record all the refugees that exist in DRC so that we can have a clear number.
So give us an example of some of the communities that you've come across. I know at the moment you recently been living in Kalemi, in Tanganyika, province of Congo.
Yeah.
You could tell us later the story of how you ended up there, but what are you finding in terms of the refugees from other countries who are living in Kalemi?
Yeah, in Kalemi, so far, I've managed to get two categories of refugees who are there. We have the Burundians, especially those who ran in 2015. You know, there was a lot of kind of political tensions here, and some ran in Kalemi in 2015. And then we have the Rwandans also who migrated to Kalemi in 2015. But again, in Kalemi, what happens is that as per now, since 2019, the CNA, the National Commission for Refugees, closed their offices in Kalemi and they left towards Lubumbashi. So the UNHCR only remained there and also closing the offices. So in terms of recording the same refugees, there's nobody exactly to do so. And this is among the area we are trying to engage the Congolese government, because after all, the current Congolese refugee law gives authorities and powers to the governor and the administrator of the territory to register refugees and grant them a temporal document. And this is the kind of things we want to do to promote that one and to ensure that we bring the numbers and we share them to the governor and tell them to give them the temporal document as Senate will come in later on.
So how many refugees are there in Kalemi?
As per now, I'm not yet sure about the exact number of the refugees we have in Kalemi, but from the few I have tried to meet, they told me that there are many. What I know, the number which is right now known is the number of those who ran away from South Kivu and from the North Kivu because of the war. That number is around 4,017 people. And these are the ones who have been recorded, and they are in the Kikongo camp as per now as we speak. Yeah.
Right. And so there are probably, would you say, similar numbers of refugees from Burundi and Rwanda as well?
Yeah, exactly. We believe that the Rwandan refugees and Uganda refugees in Kalemi are likely to be also around 5,000. But also among this one, the numbers of the people who ran away from South Kivu and North Kivu, some among them are refugees, are already registered refugees. And others, Congolese also who ran away from their houses. So that's how it is in that number.
Okay, so close to 10,000 people who've been forcibly displaced living in Kalemi, and you're saying that the government authority for refugees has left.
Yeah.
Has no office there, and now even UNHCR are leaving.
Yeah.
And there's no other organizations working with them at all.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it is. Now, what we are so much concerned exactly that the people are being left alone without any other alternative. That's how when I reached Kalemi, the first thing I did is to mobilize other actors of the civil society and tell them, guys, we don't need to abandon these people here. At first, they had a problem to understand me, but I managed to organize 3 meetings. And 3 meetings trying to share with them information, the laws that exist, who are the actors involved in the refugee protection. And then people came to understand. And now, we have a structure of the civil society which is willing to take up the battle and advocate for the refugees that in Kalemi right now.
Yeah. I mean, in any other country that I've been to, 10,000 people forcibly displaced effectively in camps, it would be inconceivable that there wouldn't be any authorities or any organizations working with them. And I think that gives a sign of how neglected the topic is. I guess also Kalemi is quite far geographically, it's 12 hours by ferry from where we are now near Uvira, which is also another distance from the war in Bukavu and Goma. And so maybe it's just not on the radar of the humanitarian sector. And then there's local organizations like yours and the different projects you're involved in actually trying to help in terms of awareness and policy. But otherwise, how do the refugees get by in Kalemi? What do they do to support themselves if there's literally no aid?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kalemi itself, as a province right now, is a bit vulnerable. So first of all, we have to realize that Kalemi became a province in 2015. Mm-hmm. And in that way, with the political tensions in DRC, we haven't managed to create the necessary infrastructure for itself. 70% of the people residing in Kalemi have been themselves in their past victims of forced displacement. So in most cases, those who are in Kalemi city are the people who ran away from the war zones and came and they started building their lives in Kalemi. So, and on their own way, and they haven't gotten support from the government, to help them to integrate. So they are, in terms of, they are still themselves, considered as IDPs, much as they are a bit settled. So, and again, Kalemi is 22 hours from Uvira in a ferry. Yeah, you're on the water up to Kalemi. That's the only way to reach Kalemi right now. And if it's on that, but Kalemi has a national airport. It can take you to Kinshasa. But in this one, in all this kind of dimension, people are trying to create their own ways of surviving. When I reached in Kalemi, I realized that there are issues people can get involved in, especially the refugees. In terms of business, Kalemi is a business area. So if the refugees are empowered in order to do some small activities, some small income generating activities so that they become a bit self-reliant, I think is one among the best way we can offer to the refugees. Two, I realized that in order to survive, refugees are involved in petty work because Kalemi being a new town, there is a lot of constructions, especially the houses. Quite a number of houses are being constructed. There are Chinese who are constructing the roads, and people tend to get the refugees are going to town to look for this kind of jobs around. And they are given some petty money around. Sometimes we are wondering if they have, some of them are not in the position to negotiate the amount of money they should be paid. I think we have observed that some are really paid as cheap labor. But also women are so much involved in commercial sex in order to get money and in order to survive. And again, this is the only option they have in order to get the money. That's so far what I've seen. Yeah, the refugees are doing in order to survive in Kalemi.
And you were telling me that when there was a large influx from North and South Kivu, that because there were no aid organizations giving handouts, people displaced from the war were knocking on people's houses and asking for food and emergency support. Yeah. Can you tell me more about what you witnessed in that regard?
Yeah, exactly. What happens in Kalemi, that in many parts of Kalemi, every single day, especially in the morning between 6 a.m. up to 9 a.m. It's very difficult to be at home and you fail to get someone, especially who ran away from the war, coming and knocking at your door and asking for help, for an assistance. It's very difficult in the town of Kalemi. So those kind of scenarios are really common. And in this process, We talked to some ladies, especially to some young girls who claim that they have been sexually abused when they are in this process of asking food in people's homes. But also in town, especially at the main market of Kalemi, when you reach there, you'll find people on the roadside begging, and when you ask them who are they, they'll tell you that they are coming from the war town in Bukavu or in Goma. So you find them on the roadside, and when you enter into the restaurant, you want to eat in the restaurant, in just 2 or 3 minutes, you see people coming in begging for food. And when you ask them who are they will tell you we are refugees running away from the war. Yeah, that's what is happening in Kalemi currently.
It sounds very challenging, and you also in the past have not always been a strong advocate for the international aid sector in terms of the way they work and the way that they get involved in political issues one way or another, which is based on things that you've told me. What are your thoughts in terms of whether or not the aid sector would be a benefit in Kalemi, or whether actually there are different ways of imagining what supporting the most vulnerable in Kalemi would look like, rather than just following traditional aid models?
Yes, I have quite a number of in observation. In Kalemi also there is another camp of internally displaced people. This camp is in a place called Taba. I think you can still remember the first pictures I sent to you.
Yeah.
And this camp has been there since 2018 and supported by the US aid. Mainly they got the whole assistance. This camp was quite modern, and they were getting support from the US aid in terms of water, medical assistance, food, and other necessities they had. But my question was like, why could we not empower people to be able to generate money themselves, rather than keeping them in the camp and giving them food every day or every month, because food was distributed every month. It's only the reason that the US aid cut the aid that people are saying that they won't get food anymore. I think it's something I advocated in Uganda, that we shift from the food distribution of maize, cooking oil, to give refugees money, especially those who can use this money in order to set up their own businesses. It is something I'm trying to advocate for. I believe in Kalemi that would be most effective if the IDPs and the refugees are helped to get access to money. They can set up their own businesses, because, as I said, Kalemi is more a business area, because in the surrounding of Kalemi are the areas where you have minerals. And there is a lot of connection with those mineral sites and the town of Kalemi. So there is a lot of movement of people coming to Kalemi, buying things, taking them to the mineral sites. So that's, again, if we empower refugees in terms of the creative activities, in terms of agriculture, some can be involved in agriculture, some can be involved in animal rearing. That can be much helpful, rather than entirely depending on the relief aid in terms of food. Yeah, like maize, we were saying about maize coming from outside and being distributed to the refugee in Kalemi. Yeah, tends to make them more dependent, always dependent, and they have opportunities around which they can capitalize.
And in terms of how that could be done, would you recommend, I mean, based on your background, founding refugee-led organizations, how would you recommend that support would be channeled to the most vulnerable families to be able to tap into those business opportunities that you're talking about in Kalemi?
Yes, as per now, it is the same thing which is existed in which we also advocated for, which is real. First of all, we must have a national organization that may accompany refugees in terms of advocacy, to understand, to help the authorities and other key players to understand the situation of the refugees. We have realized that refugees themselves, there are things they cannot address effectively. So in this time of a national organization that can come in to stand up for refugees, I believe the civil society, which I'm connecting with right now, can play that role at the national level to ensure that refugees are given a lot of space in terms of freedom of movement, in terms of accessing the conventional document to travel. Because if people really have to capitalize the opportunities in Kalemi, sometimes they need to move up to Kigoma, Tanzania. Sometimes they need to move up to Zambia. So, and again, on the ground in Kalemi, we need to have a refugee organization themselves, an organization working directly to the refugees who can coordinate all this kind and put people together, organize them in meetings, organize them for a training session, help them to learn about business, should get information on what can bring for them money in Kalemi, do all this kind of field work and make people have access to information and what is needed where so that people can get involved in this kind of business. But also in terms when they are in conflicts of the law, we need to have lawyers who can come in and and help them to be released. I can tell you that I was shocked recently when I was at Kalemi. UNCR organized and paid a lot of money to organize a public hearing for returnees, who there are refugees who the Congolese who are refugees in Zambia, and now they return back to Karemi. The two cases I was shocked about was a returnee against someone who was in Karemi, a Congolese in Karemi. The Congolese returnee had a case against someone who is a resident of Kalemi. And then there was a case also of a refugee from Burundi who had a case with a Congolese in Kalemi. And when I was listening to because it was public hearing in a public place, so I was decided to sit there and understand the case. And I realized that the refugees needed someone, a lawyer really to understand the refugee issue in order to defend them. But surprisingly, these two people were sentenced, and I was so shocked. And I was like, if we happen to get money, we need to organize an appeal because their cases needs really someone who understands the refugee issues. Yeah.
And talking of UNHCR and your interactions over the years with UNHCR, I think you experienced slightly different approaches between Uganda and Congo. And when you reached Goma, where you were living for the last 4 years before moving to Kalemi, you were interacting with UNHCR in terms of the work they and you were doing there with Rwandan refugees in terms of protection, repatriation. Maybe you could tell us a bit about what happened in Goma and what you see the refugee protection situation is looking like in Goma at the moment.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think as you know, we have sometimes most of my interaction with UNHCR are on two different levels. And I believe that sometimes I put on a human rights glasses. UNHCR puts on a political and sometimes humanitarian glasses. What the difference between the two is for us in human rights, we believe in the protection of each individual. And each individual life count for us in human rights. However, on the other side of UNHCR, whether it's in Uganda or DRC, UNHCR is like, okay, for us, we care about the numbers. If we don't want to risk the lives of many people because of 2 or 3 individuals. So again, that in terms of tension, that has been one among the areas I always find the difficulties with UNHCR in terms of judgment, in terms of decision making. And this is what happens again when I reached in Goma. I realized that UNHCR was in 2 ways. One way was too political, and then the other way was discouraging any idea which can push for the refugee protection, especially the Rwandan refugees who for the years have been lacking protection. And When I started working on this, UNCR was not happy. They wanted me to join them. And, but I said, no, what I want here is to promote what is refugee protection. The second interaction.
Sorry to interrupt, but why do you think you weren't aligned? What was it that UNHCR was trying to achieve in Goma then?
I think UNHCR is taking up the line of the Rwandan government. This again starts with the secession clause in 2012 when you still remember that in 2012 when the Rwanda government went to the UNHCR and asked them to cancel the refugee status of Rwandans. UNHCR agreed. And later on, 2014, with the lobbying and pressure from different actors, UNHCR had to come back to its senses and said, no, it cannot fail to offer protection to the Rwandan refugees. But all these other countries stopped that. But in DRC, UNHCR took a different direction because again, in UNHCR, there was nobody who can inform the world that this is what is happening. So UNHCR realized that it has a ground. But on top of that, in Goma, some staffs of UNHCR in Goma were themselves Rwandans. And again, at the same time, working for UNHCR, but also at the same time, being close to the Rwandan government and making sure that they implement the policies of the Rwandan government. So this alone, in Goma also, you could realize that the most of UNHCR officers stayed in Rwanda while they're working for refugees in DRC, in Goma. And every time they could cross the border to go and sleep in Rwanda. And this alone could not favor them in order to take good decisions that can favor the protection of the refugees. So with this kind of situation, they relied on what the Rwanda is going to give them as instructions, and that's what they implemented in DRC.
And just to be clear, what are those instructions? What was the position, in your opinion, of the Rwandan influence on Rwandan refugees in Congo?
Yeah, the Rwandan foreign policy for Rwandan refugees outside are very clear. There are two. One, all the Rwandan refugees who are outside should come back to Rwanda because Rwanda is safe. Two, whoever does not come it will no longer be considered as a Rwandan refugees and should lose the Rwandan status. So these were two major issues. But on the other side of the refugees, they believe that Rwanda is not safe for everybody. Actually, if the refugees worked with in Goma, at least 25% were those refugees who were picked from Goma and then they were taken to Rwanda. But in the process, they managed again to sneak out from Rwanda and came back to Goma to declare themselves as refugees because they realized that the situation in Rwanda wasn't good. And so we engaged the UNHCR on this particular point, but again, yes, because it's, as I said, they had to rely on the Rwandan government policy, but they continued to implement this. For Rwanda, again, the Rwandan refugees in DRC, Rwanda tend to think, don't officially Rwanda believes that all the Rwandan refugees in DRC either FDLR or members of the FDLR. So this does not give us the glimpse to separate those who are armed and those who are simple civilians who are looking for protection. Because the Rwanda, if you see Rwanda government is exactly vocal and has a voice in this. And whatever Rwanda says, because there is no alternative information, people tend to believe that that is a fact, which is not the case.
Yeah. And what was the experience for you in trying to stand up to this narrative?
Yeah, when I reached in Goma, first of all, I wanted also to, I was too much deep. First of all, I left the office work and there was so much in communities. I visited so many refugee communities in order, first of all, to understand whether we have refugees and whether these refugees are FDLR or
FDLR, just explain FDLR.
FDLR, this is the Rwandan rebel group based in DRC. So I had to understand this and I had to move in different refugee community, visiting them physically, visiting homes. I went in different homes, looking at women, looking at children. I visited schools where the children go to school too. And I saw some of the which kind of activities they do. I visited the markets where they sell things from. So I came and then I had to produce a report that this is what I have seen. So I have seen that there are two categories. Yes, we have FDLR who are in the forest fighting, but also we have refugees who are doing all sorts of small jobs around in order to survive and who are lacking protection in terms of ensuring that they can move freely in order to survive. So again, after this report, I presented it to UNCR. I also presented the report on how where the areas of refugees are more dominant, these particular areas. But UNHCR claimed that in these areas is dominated by Congolese. I said no. This particular came with the report of the pictures of the people, the homes, the meeting we had with the people, the discussions, the video, the discussions we had with the people, what they are saying. And from that time, UNHCR exactly started making some kind of trying to understand. They started thinking that yes, we have refugees that need this document here. Things started moving on positively, but later on with Grandi visiting Goma, right? Yes,
Randy.
Grandi, yes, the UNCR boss visiting Goma. UNCR intended to hide a lot of information about the refugees in Goma, but the refugees came to my office to seek for a space where they can work on a letter to submit to Gandhi because they did not want to speak officially because they feared that if they speak they can be arrested. So I gave them the space and my computer, and after they managed to get their letter and they presented it to Grandi. But after Grandi has left, UNCR wrote me a letter that I have crossed the red carpet. And that's the time that the UNCR country representative in Goma ordered that I should be arrested. So I was picked up by the intelligence service and I was detained there for 2 weeks. In the process, the UN Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights offices based in Goma, they have to come in and make pressure that I should be released. Yeah, that's what happens. In the second incident again was that I was arrested by the police because I was telling them that refugees should be granted the documents. That it's part of the legal process that they are supposed to be granted document. And the people who are being deported to Rwanda, they are not necessarily member of the Rwandan armed group of FDLR based in Congo, because I had documented the information that UNCR, Rwanda, together with UNCR, they are giving money, and the money is being channeled to Masisi territory, where they mobilize people. They convince them that should take that kind of picture that they are FDLR people. And that one condition, they are given the money, and also the people should accept that they are FDLR. And then they are picked from Masisi up to Goma in a transit center where they're kept for 1 month or 2 weeks in order to prepare them, to give them what to say. And when they go back to Rwanda, they officially declare in different media that they are part of FDLR. So some people managed to do this and they went to Rwanda, then managed also at a certain point they sneaked out and they came back. When they came back good enough, they did not use the normal border, but the border they used was a border, is a kind of a place where nobody could imagine that people could cross from there. And when they crossed, our actors of the civil society managed to get in contact with them. And when we went into interview, we got this information. Then we followed up the cases up to Masisi. We realized that there's money issues around. So when I made this kind of report, USCR wasn't happy. They decided to put me inside. They arrest me for 2 days into the police cell. But again, the UN Commission had to come in and release me out because this information was not clear. None. Yeah, that's what happened in UNCR. So there have been that kind of tensions. But in the process, exactly when I tried to communicate with the UN Inspector General, there is the UNCR Inspector General Office. Yeah, this Inspector General Office is the one who who tries to see the conduct of UNHCR officers in each place. So when I wrote them a letter to a complaint to them, they really took different measures, including the transfer of the UN representative in Goma. So after she has been transferred, they brought in a new one, and again, the new one also, because he also decided to reside in Rwanda, we also had a kind of not the best working relationship, especially the recent meeting with the recent summit of UN in Geneva, the Global Refugee Forum. They had a forum recently, was it last year in Geneva? Yes, and we made a lot of pressure that DRC government, the civil society, and the refugee representative should all move to Geneva and attend this particular meeting and argue on what the refugee issues in DRC. But the UNHCR representative in Goma did not want this did not even the information, he didn't want even the information to be known that there is a summit in Geneva where issues of refugees are supposed to be discussed and people should attend should attend this meeting. So he opted to go to bribe the mayor of Goma, and he gave them money in order to arrest us, who are advocating for this particular point. And this is in the process, that's how, again, we were still battling with these kind of issues until the war came. Yeah.
Well, you certainly portray a really complex situation with a multitude of motives and different actors with different positions and perspectives, including international actors, local perspectives and voices. And I know it's got even more complicated since then, since the M23 expansion of territory, which also forced you to be displaced again to Kalami. But maybe instead of touching on that in too much detail now, you are one of very few people with experience of forced displacement in Congo, effectively running a refugee-led organization. I can think of two others that we're supporting through our campaign for Congo, Capridice and Fountain of Hope, which are led by refugees who are mostly in Malawi, but have now expanded into Congo. And one of the reasons for that you shared with me is that refugees in Congo are in a permanent state of fear and very unlikely to want to start their own organizations. And so it's just a completely different landscape for refugee-led organizations compared to many other countries that we work in Africa. And it seems like it's still a long way off for refugee-led organizations to even be able to register in Congo and have legitimacy. You were saying that it's seen as the government's role to deal with refugees and perhaps UNHCR, but no one else is really expected to even get involved. So what are your plans to change this on a national level within Congo? What do you think needs to change in terms of policy going all the way to Kinshasa?
Yeah, exactly. The scenario, the Congolese refugee issue is totally different from many other countries. Even me, when I came to DRC, I was expecting that I should get some kind of groups of refugees already put in place, but I realized that refugees here in Congo is difficult for them to converge, because there is no a favorable ground that allows them to converge. So this is one among the areas I'm working upon. It's among the areas also which I decided to move again from service delivery and think about advocacy first, because still, if we don't work on advocacy issues, still the service delivery won't go very far, because there are issues we need really to fix up here. So at the national level, the first thing I did was to engage, especially when I was still in Goma. I did three things. One was to engage the media. And in Goma, I really deployed a lot of issues, a lot of energy to share ideas with the media, could invite them to different activities, organize meeting with the media, organize brief training sessions with the media. I did interviews, and then from the media, yes, we had already different journalists in Goma who really understand very well the refugee situation and could come in any time to engage the different authorities. Number two was also to engage the actors of the civil society so that they can understand. And if these also understand very well, and after a while, I realized that I'm getting a backup of the civil society actors who have understood the refugee issues. And from that time, I knew that I'm now having a backup in terms of people who can back up my work and who can spread the message where I cannot reach. The number three was to engage with the authorities now, the government authorities. Now, the challenge is, in order to engage the government authorities while in Goma, I managed to engage with the army in Goma, the army officers in Goma. We had different meetings with them, and they clearly understood the issues of the refugees at a certain point. The police was already collaborating with us, but we used to have a problem with the intelligence services. That's where the big problems were, and also the political authorities. Political authorities, we had a problem with them, especially the MPs, because some MPs were using refugees in order to, some refugees in order to get votes for political purposes. So I used to have that kind of challenges. And I knew that in order to overcome this kind of challenge, I needed to have an advocacy at the national level, which will involve the Minister of Internal Affairs. And again, this is one among the areas I want to go and at the national level to bring on board the Minister of Internal Affairs, to bring on board someone, the presidential advisor on refugee issues. If we manage to bring these two people on board, I believe they'll be able to look to make some kind of reforms. The reforms we need in terms of policies. So far, we have worked on a policy on a refugee law, new Congolese refugee law, and it's a bit suffering in the parliament. Last year in June, the Speaker of the Parliament promised us actually himself made a press conference that yes, he's concerned, he's aware about the necessity to bring in a new refugee law, and he said that he's going to introduce the law in the Parliament. But up to now, he hasn't done so. And we have felt again, yes, going to Kinshasa, from here to Kinshasa is some kind of at least 300 USA dollars. That's going, then coming back again another 300 USA dollars. So we didn't have a lot of money to say that we can go to Kinshasa in order to follow up this particular case. But we are much aware that we need to make a reform in the refugee policy. Number two, we need to make a reform in the National Commission of the Refugees, because we don't want it to be a commission anymore. We want to make it a directorate that can be a bit independent and come up with a refugee agenda. We need a clear refugee agenda for DRC. That's the number two we want to do in terms of advocacy at the national level. But also at national level, we want to come up with different umbrella or different groups, different sectors that can focus on the refugee issues, especially in terms of the inclusion of the refugee in decision-making processes, all these kind of things which we have tried to promote in Uganda, that we have at the national level a commission, a kind of a committee which involves the refugees, which involves the civil society, which involves government, which involves UNHCR, all these kind of things. We want to see it happening at the national level, but also at the provincial level. And lastly, what we want to see is that in DRC, every year, at least when there is a meeting at an international level, a conference at the national level, something at the international level, we want to see refugees in DRC being present there. We also want to see that the Congolese government can send a delegation there. We also want to see that different actors of the civil society who are involved in the refugees issues can be present there in this kind of forum in order to echo the views and the ideas and to help the world to know what's happening in the refugees in DRC, but also evaluate the government and also help the government to make commitment which people can base on in order to track the change, the progress. Because it's difficult to make to track the progress once you don't have a particular commitment of the government. And this is what happened in the Global Refugee Forum, in which UNHCR did recently in December. The failure to engage the government of DRC to help it to get commitment in Geneva, that could help us to get here to track now, to keep on reminding the government that, you said you'll do this, but you haven't done so. In our advocacy, that is lacking.
Sure. Yeah. So for now, Pecos's work is under the organization Kulihoshi, and Kulihoshi is one of our partner organizations listed on the Cohere's campaign for Congo, which is up on our Reframe platform. And any support that we raise, we're able to give 100% to our partners without even the transaction fees being deducted. And I think from listening to Pecos today, you should all be able to hear not only his absolute dedication and commitment, probably beyond almost anyone I've ever seen, to be arrested almost 30 times in pursuit of his goals and objectives, but also that it works, because you could hear the policy changes he was able to achieve in Uganda while he was there for 20 years against the odds, but with just utter persistence. And now arriving in Congo and finding that the situation is at square one, or even minus where it was in Uganda when Pecos arrived there. He now has this clear vision for change, and I think it can be. He does this work with a small team with minimal costs, very light footprint. So anything that is raised is put to very good use in terms of the potential. And we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if this will succeed, but I think I and Cohere, we would do everything we can to support your work. Which, if that means opening up connections, sharing the work that you're doing, sharing your stories on Reframe, bringing people to our gathering point sessions where they're able to hear from you directly in live conversations, including in breakout rooms where they can ask you questions. This is the kind of work we want to carry on doing at Cohere. And so perhaps this could be the first of many podcasts where we can still hear how you're progressing as things go on. And thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Keep up the good work.